Okay, perfect. Thank you. All right. And oh wait, which one is my camera? Sorry, before you like if I wanted to look directly for. Okay,
Mhm.
cool. Okay, thank you. Perfect. Thank you. All right. And so we could start at any point, right? All right. And action. Hey, what's up, y'all? You are listening to your Mental Matters podcast. I'm your girl, Mo. And for those of you watching, thank you for tuning in. And we're back with another episode, a special episode with a very special guest. My friend, my former NYU colleague,
I mean, we're
peer,
alumni now.
right?
Bobcats, long live.
That's it.
Yeah.
But Gabe, welcome to the podcast. I want to have you introduce yourself, of
Okay.
course, to the people, let them know who you are, what you do before we get into like the episode and the topic and stuff. But thank you so much for coming.
No, of course.
I appreciate you for being here. And yeah, who are you, Gabe? What
Yeah.
do you do?
Well, my name is Gabriel Windochel. I'm also a mental health counselor. I would more so describe myself as a trauma-informed psychotherapist.
Mhm.
A lot of, as you know, a lot of my research that I did at NYU was around pervasive trauma and how it affects communities that live in the fringes of society. So my like special focus within that was obviously giving my own identities, right? So people of color, like queer folk, LGBTQIA plus, indigenous folk, and neurodivergent individuals.
Mhm.
So a lot of what that's led me to is kind of working with like couples. Like I think my first position after NYU was actually during the pandemic with MTA workers, which was really
Mm.
a really particular experience that kind of shaped me a lot now and how I see individuals. I think before, right, when we're studying, it's like all in tangent of like a book we're reading,
Mhm.
basically. But when you actually like get on the shoes of being a therapist, it's like there's a lot of things that are scary. And I think that position, particularly given that it was with that demographic, really opened my eyes to, you know, particularly about trauma, like how it actually manifests in different ways,
Yeah.
right? And yeah, that's kind of what I do. Besides that, I do a lot of other stuff. Like I guess like I'm a very creative person.
Mhm.
So, besides my professional career, I have, other stuff like music, like event throwing and all that, which doesn't like align. So,
Yeah.
we'll just summarize that. And
Mhm.
also I work in the service life industry because I find it really helpful for me. We
Yeah.
do so much mental work that I guess like physical
Yes.
um kind of counterparts kind of help like balance it out. So yeah, that's
Mhm.
me. A little bit about me.
I love that. And thank you for sharing. Yeah, I think yeah, just to, add to what you were saying too. I do think I agree, right? Like as a student and like learning and becoming like, knowledgeable through like textbooks and like, we have professors that's teaching us. It's a whole different experience, but
Hmm.
then once you're out of school and you're actually working with clients and things like that and kind of getting into your niche of like what you're doing, it's a whole different ball game. So
Yeah.
I think I completely agree with that, and I think like the work that you're doing is amazing. I don't
Thank you.
I don't I don't think like trauma, like addressing trauma and like just being kind of in the trenches with like
Hmm.
other people to address their trauma ever gets easy. And
Hmm.
and therapists, people who are in the field doing that work don't get the recognition that they deserve. And so I think, for you, you get your flowers here,
Hmm.
and that's the whole purpose of the podcast too, to, raise awareness, but to also like give people their flowers, like other mental health
Hmm.
professionals who are doing the work. And so I think, my hat is off to you, of course.
Thank you so much.
You're
Yeah.
welcome.
Yeah. And I think also like I think it's very different. So I also get into that, but I guess like the way in which I exert therapy is very different.
Yeah.
And it brings about like a whole different type of set of skills that you need and
Mm-hmm.
like a different armor, I guess. Like what I'm talking about, just a little sneak peek of
Yeah.
what we're gonna be talking. Like I work a lot with narrative therapy, which is one of the schools of person-centered psychologies, right? And
Yeah.
like I think being that that's the fourth floor is a humanistic one, it doesn't really get credit or it gets discredited a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And I think like doing that type of work has been really interesting. So I'm excited to like be able to talk about that a little bit with
Mm-hmm.
everything that we're going to talk about today. Yeah.
Oh, period. Okay,
Yeah.
because I love narrative therapy. I
Mm-hmm.
remember, like, I think I thought I was a narrative therapist in school, and
Mm-hmm.
I was like, because like when we can figure out like what's your theoretical orientation, like
Mm-hmm.
what are you more, what would be like your field of, your niche, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think for me, I was naturally drawn to narrative therapy because I think our stories are so important, especially
Yeah.
as like black and brown people, people of color. Our stories literally are like our
Hmm.
life. Like,
Yeah,
like,
100%.
and so I think it's super significant. And yeah, like let's talk about that. Like we could get
Hmm.
into it like right away.
All right.
But
Well,
actually no, before we get into it.
right,
Before we get
right, right.
into it, let me
Yeah,
let me let
right,
me let me
we're
not get
ready.
right. Let me not
Yeah,
jump the
yeah, yeah.
gun. But
Hmm.
I do want to, before we get into that, do a mental health check-in. And for every episode I always do the mental health check-in with the guest,
Hmm.
and just to see like how are you feeling, how's your mental health been this week or this past month,
All right.
how you been feeling.
Um, that reminds me of school. I'm like, wow, yeah. No, I appreciate that. That's a really good thing that you're doing. How has it been for me? Well, honestly, it's been getting better. I
Hmm.
think, personally, me and Mo know each other, so like I've been going through a lot, like in the sense of like having a lot of grief in my life recently and all that.
Yeah.
Moving, a lot of life transitions,
Yeah.
and I think that as of recently, I've been holding more space for myself, which a lot of the times people think that immediately is gonna feel good, but it doesn't, because it's
Yeah.
like kind of acknowledging
Mm.
that you've been running away from so much.
Yeah.
So it's been a really interesting couple. Like I feel the best way I could describe how I've been feeling recently is very grateful.
Hmm.
Like I think there's a lot of things in my life that I've ignored for a while. And when I say grateful, I not only mean to the universe and the people around me that teach me every day, but to myself.
Yeah.
Because I think that oftentimes we don't say that enough, what love we have for ourselves, how grateful we are. And I think I've been finally at a point in my life where I'm able to recognize that everything that I've done on my own accord and on my own back.
Mm.
Um, and I guess like being able to see that is a very different thing than like, when we were graduating, everyone's like, oh my God, congratulations, I can't believe it. You have that doesn't feel the same than like you being able to just be like, dude, you've done the work that you need to do.
Mm.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I think it's been like a time for me of recognizing a lot of facets of my life and being really honorable to what those look like and what they are.
Hmm.
And in that way, shaping my story. Yeah.
Yes.
So yeah, I've been better. I've been better than I've been in a long time. So it feels really liberating.
I love that. I
Hmm.
love that. I feel like liberated hearing that. I just took like a deep breath and I'm like, ooh, I love that. And I think I that resonates with me too. I feel like I guess I can do my check-in too, where I feel like I don't know, I've been feeling really grown up lately. And I'm
Hmm.
like,
Right,
I've been
right.
feeling like, like I think and just what that means, I think, is being able to kind of um just kind of like be okay with myself, my decisions, and not
Hmm.
really question it or look for maybe like confirmation or validation from anyone else. Like being able to stand in my decision, like, yeah, I did that. And
Hmm.
I'm okay with it.
Yeah.
Whether other people agree with it or not. And
Hmm.
I think um I guess for like a large part of like my upbringing, like there was a lot of like, I was sheltered somewhat from like my
Hmm.
mom. Like me and my mom are like super tight. Sheltered. I had a lot of community around me. And so there was a lot of like checking in and making sure like, is this cool? Is this cool? And now I
Hmm.
just feel like I've been very like independent and just been making my own decisions and not, of course I have friends and I'll talk to them about certain things, but I think for the most part, I've just been feeling really grown up because I've been making my own decisions and just standing
Yeah.
in that and being okay
Hmm.
with it. And it has been also liberating to do
Yeah.
that, right? And I think sometimes it could be scary because it's like, ooh, I hope I'm making like
Yeah.
the right decisions, right? But
Mhm.
I think as long as like, you're thinking things through
Mhm.
properly in a healthy way,
Yeah.
you're not hurting anyone, you're not hurting yourself, then
Yeah.
you can't really go wrong. And I think it took me a while to get there,
Yeah.
because I was always like, just so used to like receiving that external
Mhm.
confirmation and validation, like, yeah, that sounds right, versus like now I'm just like, it's right because it feels right to
Mhm.
me, you
Exactly.
know so I completely that resonates with me too. And so yeah, I've been in a pretty good space.
Mhm.
um and yeah, thank you for doing the check-in.
Of course.
And yeah, so let's get into the topic, right? So the topic, this is actually a topic that Gabe, you kind of like kind of put in the air, and I was fully on board with it. And it's pervasive trauma as
Mhm.
it relates to identity, right?
Mhm.
And before we get into it, what made you want to talk about this specifically?
Um, it's interesting because even as I know this isn't like me giving therapy, it's like that neurotherapist in me like is continuously doing it. So let me kind of like see if I can. So going a little bit back because you mentioned it earlier, right? Like as people of colors, like stories are really important to us,
Mm,
right? But I think all human history has been done by storytelling,
yeah.
right? Like even before we had written word, we had spoken word, and even if we look before that, right? Um, there's a lot of like theories of how we gain language, right? And
Mm,
one of them is the Stone Age theory, which to me is really interesting. It doesn't like it's just like a side note that I need to make because it's very um kind of goes to like our nature of how this is important to us, right?
yeah.
And it's basically like this theory in retrospect says that at one point since we were nomads we started eating psilocybin mushrooms. We
Mm,
got us the awareness that we were somewhat different,
mm-hmm.
which got us the awareness that we need to create stories to protect our stuff, to know where we get certain fruits at times of the year, where we hunt certain animals. So people wanted to keep that information to themselves.
Yeah.
But it's interesting to me because the story is about separation,
Mm,
right? And I think throughout like life, there's been so much stories that have been fed to us. And I
yeah.
think even to the part of what you were saying with your checking, like what's right and what's wrong,
Mm-hmm.
exactly what is right and what's wrong?
Mm,
You know, what stories have we been told to delineate what's, correct and what is not in my life and in the life of others, or like
right.
the way in which we judge others and ourselves.
Mm,
So I think with trauma, all that plays a really big part because, you know, traditional therapy basically just focuses on psychopathology, right? Like the pathology of stuff, the negative of the situation.
yeah.
And what we often miss when we do that is that trauma is literally uh, in every single label in the DSM and every illness that we know, trauma is there. Right. So if it has such a big part, and this character in this story, particularly, which is mental illness, has such a big part,
Yeah.
then why is it that oftentimes we fail to recognize it only when and we only recognize it when it's like very pervasive, which is
Mm,
PTSD, right?
mm,
I think I wanted to talk about it because people don't understand to the extent of which just going through certain experiences as people of color, as any type of individual that faces some type of limitation in society,
mm-hmm.
the notions that you hear about yourself, the way in which people treat you, all that shapes how you perceive yourself to be capable in this world,
Mm,
right? And at the end of it, that's trauma, which
yeah.
nowadays we call it differently. We call it complex trauma, right? Like
Yeah.
which is like not necessarily one situation that happened,
Mm,
but rather the influence of a lot of stuff.
yeah.
So I think a lot of us, as we're talking about it right now, we're finally accepting the transition that we're girls and all that. But that's part of identity formation, right? Identity formation isn't something that's static. At no point are we just Mo and just Gabriel. I am Mo and Gabriel transforming in time and
Yeah.
space, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we also have to be very cognizant that the pains that we suffer in life are really guiding that train that's leading us there in a way.
Mm,
And I'm talking a lot of metaphors because I think like imagery is really important.
yeah.
But yeah, I think that's kind of like what it brought up to me. And I know we had other conversations that day that kind of like, stirred the idea of it, and we'll get to that. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I think that's a good baseline to start with there.
I love that. I
Hmm.
love it. And I think you're absolutely correct. I think yeah, trauma, everybody has trauma.
Hmm.
Everybody has experienced trauma in one shape, form, facet. Whether they can acknowledge it and accept it or not is another thing. But I think that can play a part too, and why I think people have a hard time accepting that they've experienced trauma. And so a lot
Hmm.
of times it's not until it's something like, that's in your face, you can't deny you're experiencing like symptoms now,
Hmm.
that maybe you've denied for such a long time, that people can say, you know what, maybe I have
Hmm.
experienced some trauma, and now I can't deny it because it's crippling, or
Hmm.
like it has me in a chokehold now,
Yeah.
and so I think that could play a part too in why, like, the conversations around trauma aren't like um happening as much as they should. I think
Hmm.
now, like, with mental health being as mainstream as it is now, the
Hmm.
conversations are starting to happen more often. But I do think a lot of times people don't say it's trauma, they may say it's something else,
Yeah.
right? And I because it feels easier, or nice, it feels
Exactly.
better to say that versus trauma. But we all got some trauma,
Yeah.
especially if you black, brown, if you are you got trauma,
Yeah.
and I think being able to acknowledge it, say it, and have that awareness around it is kind of like the first step to kind of like freeing yourself from it.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I think, to what you said too, like, me and you hung out like recently, and we
Mhm.
kind of got to talking about just our own life. It was kind of like us catching up after
Yeah.
school, after us both graduating with our masters in
Mhm.
mental health counseling from NYU. Crack, crack, crack.
Yeah, no, honestly, it's like that's such a thing where like I'm like, it's fair to say, but yeah, no,
Listen, right? It's like I don't
yeah, yeah,
I dealt
no,
with that too. But
yeah,
listen, we did it,
yeah, no.
So
Honestly, it was a lot,
mhm.
and not to the skirt of the school or anything, but it was a lot to be with all those white folk in a room all the time.
You know what? Yeah.
no, be really really honest. We were talking about it. Yeah,
Yes.
no, and to that end, right? It's like you see, even that, like, why are we in our heads like, oh, what should we mention or should we not? You see, like everything plays a part, and
Yeah.
that's what I mean. That's what's really interesting,
Yeah.
to the extent of which like what about us has a hesitation, And I think that's the exploration that I try to like achieve with
Yeah.
my clients through this modality. It's like, you know, stories aren't just like, Tinkerbell and Cinderella.
Yeah.
Stories are literally you. Like we
Mhm.
are a composition of a multitude of stories that we've been fed over our life. And even if we take it to that extent, we are also, if we really think about it, like a composition of everyone we've ever met in our life. We take a little part of this person, a little part of that person, etc., and we just build the mainframe that is us, influenced by the world around us.
Mhm.
I think another thing that I try to bring into the room as often as I can is that we can never forget that our formation is in context to society, right?
Mhm.
We are social beings by nature. If truthfully, because a lot of people say like I am antisocial, I'm this and that.
Mhm.
Truthfully, if you did not have other people around you, how would you get food? How would you get service or anything? We
Right.
depend on society. Even like folk that struggle with agoraphobia still need someone to go get them groceries or like a
Mhm.
doctor to go visit on them. The key fact of it is that we're social creatures and our formation is made in that way as well.
Yeah.
So within the stories that each of us receive independently in our lives, we
Mhm.
also have stories that are fed to us since Genesis because of society, right? Society has ideas of what race is, what power is, what politics are, what science is, etc. And all this from a really young age we start receiving,
Yeah.
right? And the problem for a lot of us is that given that we're born already encoded in us like trauma, right? Like as we said, like POC folk have codified into we've been through a lot for a long time, right?
Yeah.
That's in our genetics. That whole thing
Yes.
about generational trauma is really
Yes.
important. But also oh, everything that you like, even like mom yells at you at home, even like that you were bullied at school, all those things, even though they seem minute in the grand scheme of like what could happen to people,
Mhm.
that still drives a big part of us to shy away from our whole development because we're
Mhm.
afraid.
Mhm.
And that's the thing, like we'll talk about it, but
No, we talking it.
yeah,
Okay, we
yeah,
talking about it for sure.
yeah.
I love that. And it's so true. I think generational trauma is getting talked about more now, but there
Mhm.
needs to be so much more conversation around it because it's so true. And that's why they tell pregnant women not, to just be mindful of their emotions and things like that
Mhm.
because everything that you're feeling will go into the child and even
Mhm.
maybe the things that you're not feeling but the things that you've gone through, right? A lot of times like there's been a lot of conversation around like tantric and like womb, like how your womb,
Healing, yeah.
if like womb healing and how it can affect the offspring. And I think like a lot of things are held in women's wombs, right?
Mhm.
And can get passed down to the children and not even realize, right?
Yeah.
Like for some reason, a person can be experiencing something and doesn't know where it came from, and it came from the parent,
Yeah.
and maybe the parent never talked about it, and then
Mhm.
now it's like, and that's why I think just that awareness of like generational, like what has happened in your previous life, right? Like in your like generations before, I think
Mhm.
is so key to have that knowledge and awareness.
Yeah. We all
um
carry a legacy, saying it like that,
exactly.
right? And that being both physical and
Hmm.
both mental. We'll
Hmm.
talk about how trauma also has, Van der Welselkalk, right? Like trauma is
Hmm.
stored in the body, right? But the body keeps the score.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's really interesting to me, right? And even to the part of like as the other key fact to the title of like what we wanted to talk about, right? Being identity bound.
Yeah.
Even if I were to ask any person I would ask to ask you, who's Mo?
Yeah.
You probably have like five stories that immediately come to your head, right? Like
Yeah.
of who am I? Descriptors of your life, etc.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of the time in the same process that we think of that, we think of five things that we don't want to say that has happened to us, right?
Mm.
So those are also stories that we
Yeah.
have of things that have occurred in our life that we want to keep secret,
Yeah.
right? And it's that I think within that we create these descriptions of who we are within
Mm-hmm.
this life story that we have, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the problem is when those descriptions are very thin, when they're very negative towards who we are, that's where the influence of this series is trying to see more, but it's still there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And it's like all of us have it to some degree because it's a spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
It's not that anyone's safe kept from this, right? So
Mm-hmm. Come on, Gabe over here dropping gems. Y'all listening? Are y'all
yeah.
listening? Because yeah, he
Yeah.
came in hot.
No, yeah, yeah. I love this topic, and if I can share like a little bit of gems of what I've been able to receive, right? Like it's
Mm-hmm.
great, right?
Yeah, I love this. I love it so much, and I think, um, you know, I think we talked about this too the day that we hung out.
Hmm.
That trauma. I don't know if trauma is my niche or not. I think I have a lot of clients right now
Hmm.
that all have trauma.
Yeah.
Most of my clients are black and brown of color, right? There's a couple of, others sprinkled in there, right?
Hmm.
But for the most part, there's trauma there, right? And I do think that, um, I'm still working on whether or not do I want to like because trauma can be so
Overwhelming.
overwhelming, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Especially when you have your own, right? And it's like a lot of times
Yeah.
there's, the conversations around transference and countertransference. It's like,
Hmm.
ooh, and so I think, like I said early on, I think it's just very special to just have that desire to want to
Yeah.
tackle it. I'm doing it and I'm passionate about it to
Hmm.
help people through their trauma. Um, but I'm like, can I do this long term?
Yeah.
Like I think I question that a lot too. But anyway, that just came to my mind, and I wanted to say that just to give you of again your flowers of like really
Thank you.
being
Yeah.
passionate about it
Yeah.
because I feel it as you're talking about it right now. I'm like, ooh, this
Yeah.
is good. It's
Hmm.
really good, and I wanted to also just allow us to kind of share about ourselves. I mean, I feel like my audience they kind of know me at this point.
Yeah.
I've talked about a lot of the same things, like my own traumas, my own
Yeah.
experiences, and I can share that too because you may not know. I don't know that I got to really like unpack my own traumas, which really kind of I guess begin with growing up in a single parent household, my father being absent. Um,
Hmm.
and I believe by choice, right? Because I think to not
Yeah.
be in your child's life is a choice
No,
ultimately. For
100%.
whatever the reasons are, I think it's a choice. So I was raised by a single parent and she was like super mom, right? So I never felt like I was lacking or without, but to not have both parents present is in fact a trauma, whether
Hmm.
people want to, acknowledge it or not. Both of my parents are immigrants. My mom's from Jamaica, my father's from Haiti. And so I don't really know like my father's history. Like I don't
Hmm.
know all of what he's been through. But I do know that, his absence did affect me at a certain point in my life. I believe probably when I was a teenager, like around
Hmm.
high school age, I was very angry. And I wanted answers. And I would go to my mom for the answers, but she didn't have much to give me because she don't really know much about his history either. Like we
Hmm.
know, like, of course I know my grandma, his mom, I know my family on that side, but as far as like in Haiti, what was his experience before coming
Hmm.
to America and stuff like that, I don't know. Right. And so I think, for a long time I was angry, but as I got older, and then of course I'm in the fields. And so like
Hmm.
I want to be able to like practice and work with others through their healing and be healed. I don't want to
Hmm.
be carrying like a heavy load and be angry and I'm trying to help people through their stuff. So I think even though that can be a reality. Like you can
Yeah.
still do great work but still have your own healing and trauma that you're working through. But
Yeah.
for me, I made a conscious effort that when I'm dealing with these clients, I don't want to be a hypocrite. And so
Yeah.
for me, I released that. I
Hmm.
released it and like he's still alive. He's in Queens, so I see him sometimes randomly
Yeah.
and he's doing okay. But I know like when I see him, I'm not angry now
Yeah.
anymore. And that to me was, just a trauma that I had to work through to get to a place of where like this doesn't have like so much.
I'll let you call on you, kind of.
Exactly. But
Yeah.
I can still acknowledge that because of his absence, there's certain ways that I am because of it. Like I am
Hmm.
very like like I think I talked about this in the last episode too. Like a lot of times at least I think I can operate from my masculine a lot
Hmm.
because I had to be I had to be strong. I had to be tough
Yeah.
because it's like, what else you gonna do?
Yeah.
And I think now as I'm older and I'm working through things and I'm healing and I'm able to process things in a healthy way, I can identify when I'm operating from my masculine and then try to
Hmm.
operate from my feminine more because
Yeah.
I don't need to operate from that place like
All the time.
all the
Yeah.
time.
It's like Whenever I hear that, I tell my clients that's like a survival way of you communicating that you adapted for a while and it worked for you, right?
Mhm.
But that's when we have to do the work of, right, like we have all these selves of us that
Mhm.
need their space to exist, and then when we need to shut them off, we do, right?
Yeah.
And to the part of you talking about it, right, like not being as angry anymore. I feel you, right? Like I think we shared this before, but similarly, right? Like both my parents are immigrants,
Mhm.
but my dad kind of chose not to be there
Mhm.
in my life a lot. He was more in my brother's life, which was interesting because growing up, I still saw him, but not there for me, there for
Yeah.
my brother.
Mhm.
So, but not that that had any effect on me or anything. Just it did. But
Yeah.
to that extent, like I'm very grateful that I had my stepdad for a while when I was growing up because he's my father to that extent. Like I literally have his last name tatted on my back. Like
Mm.
that man literally saved my life, and I always tell him that because similarly when I was like in high school. Coming to terms with the fact that I may be queer. I'm a bisexual, non-binary man,
Mhm.
and it's like or person, right? Not man, that doesn't fit there.
Mhm.
But like to that extent, that comes from a place of like, I'm half Peruvian, half Venezuelan.
Mhm.
Like in my Peruvian side, like we're indigenous. We're like really do believe in the aspect of like, being a three-spirited person.
Mhm.
And since a young age, I felt that. And, like when that started coming about, I felt even lonelier and lonelier to the part, I struggled with my own depression and suicidality from a really young age.
Mhm.
And then when I came out finally to my family, that wasn't received well.
Yeah.
So I ended up coming to the States by myself, like at 17.
Mhm.
Immediately went into school, and immediately had, as you're saying, like to be a parent to myself. And then not only was I born and raised in Puerto Rico, then I had to raise myself here as an adult in New York, which is such a tough city,
Yeah.
right? So,
Mhm.
like, it's in that end, as we talk about identity information, I feel you in that sense where like I've had to go through so much versions of myself.
Mhm.
And I think for a while, I thought that I was just crazy, right? Like I'm a lost person. Like I can't choose a path, but it was that I was learning while still having to be there for myself.
Mhm.
And in the conversation of family, I think, you know, the same way that as you're saying, like you build an exterior to be able to function in this world. I had so much, let's say, negativity to sum it up from my mom, particularly that my grandmother, my dad's mom,
Mhm.
like interestingly enough,
Mhm.
was kind of like the person who I always looked up to. Right?
Yeah.
This was a person that in Venezuela, like she was an Afro woman, Afro Latina, which is super interesting and super
Mhm.
uncommon back there. And then like not only that, but my grandma was the type of person that you walk down the street and everyone knew her because of
Mm.
how kind she was,
Yeah.
even though like I knew personally that she had gone through hell. Like,
Yeah.
like she left her house at 13 immediately to have a family, and never was able to go to school. She came from Barinas y Apure, which is like a valley town in Venezuela. Like it's
Mhm.
not near anything that we know. And it's
Yeah.
not near a type of poverty that is seen in America, right?
Mhm.
Um and my like for a long time when I was going through that rage and like going through that of like why would my family do this to me in the sense where they cast me out? I'm just like trying to live in my own skin. I
Mhm.
will always have her in mind, and the times that I could reach out to her, I would. But my anger was so big
Yeah.
that a lot of times I didn't.
Mhm.
And my grandma sadly passed away in October, and that was like to this day when I say that I'm going through a lot of grief earlier. That's kind of what I mean because
Mhm.
the minute she passed away, I think the last layer of anger that I had dissipated,
Yeah.
right? Like I think it it was a thing where I realized, which I would love to share,
Mhm.
anger is a punishment that we give ourselves.
Mhm.
A lot of the times we believe emotions are natural, but anger particularly is a choice.
Mm.
When we choose to be angry at someone, it's a choice.
Mhm.
Even though we might not see it as that in the biggest extent of life, given that we've used anger as people of color for so long that it seems so familiar to us,
Yep.
it really is a tool that we employ that
Mm.
keeps us in a certain position that does not allow us to grow.
Mm.
Right? And when my grandma passed in October, like having to like realize that the one person that ever loved me unconditionally is not there anymore, like
Mhm.
for who I was, like because thankfully, like before she passed, like I mustered up the courage to come out to her and all that. And I remember like when I talked to her about it, she's like, "That's why you didn't talk to me? You think I didn't know that?" You
Wow.
know? And I
Mhm.
remember like as you say, you operate from the masculine. I operate from the feminine a lot.
Yeah.
Like, and it's like I think it's because of her. And like one of my most vivid memories is like none of like male cousins could be in the kitchen, but she would always put me there. When my aunts would try to take me out, she'd be like, "No, no, 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 leave him
Mm-mm.
there." Like it
Mm-hmm.
was like, and I know how to cook. I cook a lot,
Yeah.
and no one ever taught me because they don't do that back home. But I would just see her so much cooking, and I saw how happy it made her to see people full.
Mm-hmm.
That those are things that I've realized when that anger fell. And as I realized in my practice, I think you said something very important, hypocrisy. I was like, I'm being a hypocrite to my
Mm-hmm.
clients. Like
Mm-hmm.
I'm operating in my own life from a place of anger.
Yeah.
How am I teaching them to heal and to break down their boundaries and to be honest to themselves
Yeah.
and to, and now that I'm recovering from that big loss that I had and all that, I see myself in such a different light, and I feel that my story completely altered.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that, as you said, like earlier when you were describing the way in which you carry yourself in the world, I think at the end of the day, right and wrong is arbitrary. If
Mm.
you carry yourself with kindness and like more so love for yourself in this world,
Yeah.
that is the only way to operate, because as long as you have love for yourself, you'll have love for others,
Yeah.
because to the extent of which love can change you and your story,
Mm-hmm.
right? We can probably think of a lot of key figures in our storylines that, as we ended up being therapists,
Yeah.
we saw that love they gave others that led us here,
Yeah.
right? And the change that sometimes I see in my clients, I don't attribute to myself,
Mm.
I attribute to them.
Yeah.
But it's such a such a warm place to be able to have the privilege and opportunity to help people understand themselves better,
Yeah.
right? Because I think that's the ultimate thing. We are so pushed to be confused and to honor the bad in our life in the way we're socialized as people of color,
Mm-hmm.
that we often forget good is there. We just don't
Mm-hmm.
see it because we have been forced to have a certain perception of the world and our, in that sense, story, right?
Yes.
Our identity.
Yeah.
And I think life in itself is always going to be a learning experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's very different, the disposition and way in which we want to address that. Do we want to encourage that,
Mm-hmm.
or do we want to keep living in a place of fear, in a place of anger, in a
Yeah.
place of resentment? I
Mm-hmm.
don't think that allows anyone to grow, right? And I
Absolutely.
think as we are able and willing to allow ourselves to exist from a place, as we're talking about kindness and love,
Mm-hmm.
it's such a different strength, and it's such a different way of seeing life. Because
Yeah.
when you see everyone as your friend,
Mm-hmm.
you don't feel that back of your head feeling when you see everyone as your enemy that you can't trust anyone.
Right.
Everywhere that you go, everyone's gonna criticize me.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter how much I change, I still don't fit into a norm.
Mm-hmm.
No, when everyone's your friend, why should you give an F, right? Like
Yeah.
it's like literally like existing and
Mm-hmm.
allowing others to exist.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that makes life so much more beautiful. But obviously, it takes a lot of work. As we said, also, we've had the privilege to be in school and learn all these tools and be
Mm-hmm.
able to have access to these books. Because even like information is something that you need to know how to read all this crap to be able to understand it. And it's
Exactly.
not accessible to people. Like,
Right.
and it's done purposefully so. Because
Mm-hmm.
as long as you keep us dumb, it's easy to manipulate us, right? As
Mm-hmm.
long as you keep us angry and sad, it's very easy
Yep.
to, just dictate our lives and us not do anything about it.
Absolutely.
But yeah.
Absolutely. Whew. I got I got
Yeah,
chills. First of all, I was over here.
sorry.
I went through like so many different emotions while you were talking. It was like I was about to cry one minute. I got chills the next minute. I was smiling and happy the next
Yeah.
minute because I feel like you dropped so many gems in there, and you know it was fire. And I
Thank you.
think, and I appreciate you so much for sharing your story and your experience and your journey to where you are
Mhm.
now. And I think there was like two things that you said that I definitely wanted to expound on, which one was the anger part, right? Where I
Mhm.
feel like, I say that all the time, even with my clients, right? When I ask like, how are you feeling? And they say angry, right? Anger is definitely an external emotion, right? It's like, it's kind of like that veil, that layer that you put over whatever that deeper thing is, right?
Mhm.
And I think you hit the nail on the head and was spot on with what you said about it, because it's very easy to just carry on anger, right?
Mhm.
Like um anger makes you feel like you're in control, right? Like you said, it's a choice. You choose this, and this is kind of like what aids you and guides you through, but never actually addressing whatever that deeper emotion is. And I think um people of color for centuries have used that, and sometimes it works. sometimes it fools others,
Mhm.
right? But in
And
hindsight.
also we have to recognize, but for a while that was the only thing that we were allowed to feel, right?
Exactly.
Like that's the
Exactly.
thing as we're talking about it and with the storytelling and all that. We also have to recognize that sometimes there are certain presets to how
Hmm.
we're gonna exist that we can't change.
Yeah.
When we were slaves, what could we do? Like when we were like
Hmm.
being cast out of countries, being persecuted by the Inquisition, like all these other things, what could we do? Nothing but feel these things.
Yeah.
But as we're talking about it, when is it a point that we let go
Yeah.
of that and understand that yes, they did help me for a while, but now where do I go from here? Right.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Exactly. Fire. Fire. And I'm just like, I'm blown away. I don't even know what else to say. Because
Sorry.
yeah, like I definitely agree with that. And I think even just what you were saying about um, just not having up this armor, right? To where you feel like you can't trust others, right? Just
Mhm.
kind of looking at everybody like your friend, right? And that shift that happens, instead of looking at like, I can't trust people, people are out to get me, they're my enemies, seeing it as like, no, everybody needs love, essentially,
Mhm.
and kindness. And I think I also say this a lot too, like I try to look at the glass half full most of the time.
Mhm.
I try to lead with that as opposed to half empty. And I a lot of times like my implore my clients to do the same, because coming in, a lot of times they're operating from a place of like, dreary and maybe negativity.
Mhm.
And I try to shift that, right? Because I think when you look at the glass half full, and I think that also comes from like positive psychology. Like I remember when I was in therapy and my therapist had a specialty in positive psychology. She helped me a lot to change my perspective, right? And I think I'll never forget. Shout out to Heather. That was her name. Like I to this day, I'm like
Yeah.
literally, she doesn't know the impact that she had on me, because I was dealing with a lot of anxiety at the time. This was like undergrad, right after undergrad. So anxious, having like panic attacks. I grew up in New York City, taking the subways. I'm on the subway having a panic attack, and I don't know why, right?
Mhm.
And so there were so many things on my mind, and a lot of times my thoughts were glass half empty thoughts, right? Like,
Mhm.
what if, but the outcome being super negative. And I think once going into therapy and, being able to talk to her, my perspective, like she would constantly have to like help me shift it in session. And then
Mhm.
it kind of became like, it's like muscle memory, like, okay, like now I have it down, right? And so now I try to, you know, instill some of that in my clients as well, where it's like, nope,
Yeah.
how can you reframe that? How can you reframe that thought that you just said? Because I think it goes such a long way, because we've been conditioned to
Yeah.
operate that in that way. So I think, you kind of just you drop so many gems there.
No,
And
I
so
love that you mentioned also like positive psychology because like
mhm.
even the field sounds so I always the name sounds so like
Funny, like
embarrassing sometimes like when I bring it up to because I'm like wait hold on
yeah.
because okay so the genesis of positive psychology was this social worker actually that started
Mhm.
working with geriatric patients or like terminally ill patients, right?
Mhm.
And started seeing that anything that they would try before wasn't working. The patients were just passing away,
Mhm.
a lot of pain, sadness, etc.
Yeah.
So this guy really started researching what could actually alter people and like the process of decaying, of
Mm.
dying, right? And he realized that actually community building,
Mhm.
laughter,
Mm.
being able to connect with others, like people,
Mhm.
even like this is a big thing. Like have had the opportunity to work with elderly clients, right? And like
Yeah.
there's always this understanding from other providers of that they can't do anything.
Mm.
And that's not true. Everyone being, like, as I said earlier, we're creatures of society. Being or feeling that I am able to help to some extent
Yeah.
brings so much change.
Mhm.
Like, feeling that you have a purpose,
Yep.
right? It brings so much change to how these individuals were going through their illnesses. Literally, after they started applying, like, a lot of community, like, workshops in the sense that before it was like arts and crafts, after was like actually like creating meals for each other, creating a menu. When they felt that, they noticed a big change in the way these individuals were feeling, and not only
Mhm.
feeling but decaying. Like
Right.
their symptoms were a lot slower. They like lasted a lot longer.
Yeah.
And it might seem stupid in retrospect because yeah, whatever, like being kind of whatever, but hold on, that doesn't mean that you let anyone get to you or
Right.
you know what I mean? Like holding your boundaries, having your own personality,
Mhm.
and like being able to be a strong person doesn't, cancel the fact that you can be a kind person.
You're right.
I think a lot of the times they think vulnerability is weakness, but vulnerability is strength,
Mhm.
right? And I think that's something that with, as you said, like with my clients who are also like POC identifying, I try to elaborate them with, right? Like
Yeah.
even not only that, but more so with the male clients that I have, because I think about a particular client that I had that he would come in and he would just yell at me,
Mm.
and like it was like he never had the opportunity. He was like I believe already has had a family,
Hmm.
mid 40s, something like that.
Yeah.
And like he always had a lot of anger in him, and I would just let him have it. I would, and I would remember one session he came in. You don't feel any type of way that I'm just yelling at you? I'm like, no, because I feel you need this.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? He's like, oh, but like everyone else in my, and I'm like, okay, but that's everyone else in your life. That's not me. Like I'm,
Hmm.
you know what I mean? Like
Yep.
strength comes in so much levels when you're able to understand others people's pains,
Yeah.
and that's what I mean. Where like the part of carrying yourself with kindness doesn't mean that you're gonna allow people to trample you or to go over you or anything. It
Right.
just means to realize the fact that we're all fucking human and that we're all going through it. You know what I mean? It's like we're all in the same world. I
Mm-hmm.
think sometimes the other problem, which we haven't really highlighted, is that we have such a tendency to compare ourselves to others,
Yeah.
like to others' pains, to
Yep.
other successes,
Mm-hmm.
and we don't see how much of a force that becomes in our life.
Mm.
And then you know as you were relating to the part of like your therapist doing that and all that, that's exactly what I'm talking about. That
Yeah.
is the reshaping of your story that we need to do.
Yeah.
It's not like fantasize about something. It's literally acknowledging that there are certain ways in which I communicate within my relationships, within my family, within this world, within myself,
Yeah.
that don't work anymore,
Right.
right? And that I need to find some other way before it's too late,
Mm.
right? Because at what point is your thoughts being dictated by your own voice or by the voice of your illnesses?
Mm.
Right? Externalizing the problem is so important, right?
Yeah.
Like I struggle with anger, not my anger is me, right?
Mm-hmm.
I struggle with depression, not I'm a depressed person.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like I am a victim of sexual assault. I am a victim of physical abuse. Not I was raped. I
Right.
don't care. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
the literally the language that we use to describe all this thing is so powerful because yeah, there's conscious parts of ourselves that can, when we say, "Oh, I'm so stupid," we can think it's a joke, but there's another part of us that really does think that
Mm-hmm.
wholeheartedly,
Yeah.
right? And whenever you repeat it, it keeps believing it.
Yeah.
So that work of like being able to go to a place of where I'm trying to find myself now. That's what I mean. I'm preaching the room. I'm not saying that I'm the best. There's still sometimes that I see that my actions are ill found,
Yeah.
because I'm still human. And that's the
Mm-hmm.
whole point, that if we if we take ourselves out of the seat of a student
Mm-hmm.
and think that we're a teacher at some point in our life, then that's when things become difficult,
Yeah.
because no one knows better than anyone else. Not even
Exactly.
us that have masters, as we're saying, know
Mm-hmm.
better than anyone else.
Exactly.
I just have a different set of tools that you don't have,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that doesn't necessarily mean that changes anything,
Right.
because exactly. It's we all have the capacity to be this that we're talking about, a
Mm.
loving person.
Yep.
It's whether or not we allow ourselves to get there.
Yep.
Right. And if we allow ourselves to learn enough to see why getting there is so important and
Mm-hmm.
pivotal to like not us growing as individuals, but us growing our communities
Yeah.
further, and releasing the shackles that they put on us for so long.
I'm so excited by this conversation. I don't know, you see me over
Yeah.
here smiling, right?
Yeah.
But Gabe is talking and I'm like cheesing because yes, yeah, like
Yeah.
exactly. Like I think so many things. Like absolutely. I think remaining a student is key. Like I think honestly, like I don't think I would be just where I'm at in life if I wasn't constantly like hungry to learn, constantly asking questions, even having this podcast. I think there's an element that I remain a student. Like even Amir, shout out to Amir, our engineer. We were having this whole conversation about podcasting before we started, and I think like there's so many things that I um want to learn and need to learn about podcasting, and I think remaining hungry about podcasting and the art of it and what to do with it is what still has me doing it and loving it and passionate about it,
Mhm.
right? I think the minute too that you feel like, all right, I've arrived, right, where
Mhm.
I've learned all there is to learn, then you kind of get stagnant and don't the passion kind of leaves you. And so
Mhm.
I think remaining a student even in the field of therapy and psychology is essential. Like even with my clients, like I tell them, like, at least this is my approach, right? With therapy, my therapeutic approach, I believe the client is the expert, right? I think you know individuals know themselves better than anybody else, right? And even if
Exactly.
maybe there are things that haven't been uncovered yet or you haven't discovered about yourself yet, we're on this journey together to figure it out. But I believe that what the clients feel and think trump what I feel and think. But of course, I'll
Mhm.
have suggestions. I'll, from my tools, my training, I'll offer it to them, but
Mhm.
I'm not in the room telling them what to do or
Yeah.
what's right or wrong or what to think or how to feel or whatever. I give them the space to take up the space, right? And I think, um, you know, doing that, I think, is transformative in and of itself, because a lot of times they come in with not having had that at all in their
Mhm.
lives, right? Not feeling like they can um, rewrite their stories, or they can make decisions for themselves outside of like their family or society or whatever, right?
Mhm.
And so I think, to your point of what you were saying too about like, just all of us kind of being human beings, right?
Mhm.
Like, people have certain certificates or certain, specialize in certain things or licenses and things like that, but we're all human beings, and we're
Mhm.
figuring it out day by day. Like, I haven't arrived. Like,
Mhm.
I act a fool sometimes, and I'm okay to say that, right?
Yeah.
Because I don't ever want anybody to look at me as like somebody who's arrived. Like, I don't
Yeah.
even be like you know, I'll accept, if somebody appreciates me, because I think it's important to accept compliments and when people appreciate what you do and,
Yeah.
how you've affected them or whatever. But I think just humility just goes a long way,
Mhm.
like, because honestly, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for my mom. I wouldn't be
Yeah.
here if it wasn't for her. I would be doing, I don't know where I would be,
Yeah.
and like, and for some people, there's a higher power that, people believe in. There's other things that, people feel like if it wasn't for, they wouldn't be where they're at. And I think,
Yeah.
remaining in that realm and in that mindset, will carry you through and take you to, to, to,
100%.
to heights. Right. And so I agree with a lot of what you shared. Um, and yeah, man, I'm so like grateful for this
Of
conversation.
course.
I don't even think you know.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
and I'm glad that you gave me the opportunity to, be here. Cause like, I think, you know, you know that, like, I was like one of, if not the youngest in our program. I think I was 19 when I got in, or 20.
Really?
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know that
Well,
I knew.
19 actually.
I'm not sure if I knew that.
And then I graduated at 20. Wait, that was last year. 23. 23.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like a lot of the times, like, I, when we were going through it, I was like, I'm someone that, like, I have mad piercings. I,
Hmm.
like, have a very eclectic style because before that, I used to model. I used to do all these things to
Hmm.
be able to, like, sustain my studies.
Yeah.
And like, it was really interesting because, like, sometimes I think that that's another discourse that I had to let go of, that, like, there is a certain way to look,
Mm.
like, to be able
Let's
to,
talk about it.
show who you are. Because, no, truthfully, because, oftentimes, like, I struggle with the idea, like, today, like, even though, like, I was rushing here,
Hmm.
we
You
won't,
made
we
it.
won't
You
talk
made
about my scheduling problems.
it.
But, like, like, I thought, like, should I just wear something really professional? And then I'm like, this is who you are.
Hmm.
Even, like, to the other day, like, I just got hired at a clinic. I work for Modern Therapy Group now,
Mm,
thankfully, under Jack Hassan, my
congratulations.
supervisor, who's really cool. And thank you so much, because I'm giving you a shout out because you've been really great.
Yes.
But anyways, like, even there, like, we had like our company dinner where all of our bosses flew in and all that. And like, I had a button down, but I had like not a crop top, but yeah, a crop top. I'm not gonna lie,
Hmm.
a crop top underneath. And then I'm like, at one point, I see that everyone's just like being themselves, like in their own style, and like, one of them kind of noticed because I guess it had like some strings on the side. He's like, "What do you have under there?" And
Yeah.
I was like, "Oh, sure." He's like, "Why are you not like showing it?" And I remember that, like, and that was a really pivotal moment for me because I think oftentimes, with that, to the extent of like the destination, what it says. First of all, I don't think there is a destination.
Hmm.
I think, as I said, like, life isn't static, and to believe that there's a destiny to be found in each of our lives is really hard,
Yeah.
right? Like, even like, let's think about what's it called, Paulo Coelho, The Alchemist,
Mm-hmm.
right? At the end of the, like, spoiler alert, I don't even though the book has been there for like more than 30 years,
Right.
translated into almost every language in the world. But
Hmm.
like, the whole point of the book was that at the end of the day, the treasure he was finding wasn't himself, because it was literally where he used to sleep on.
Mm.
Right? Like, he
Hmm.
went all the way to a different country, met people, etc. Went through all this shit in life to realize that the treasure all the whole time was in that abandoned church that he used to sleep in all the time with his,
Wow.
like, sheep that he sold, right?
Hmm.
And like, that's the thing about life. I think oftentimes we think that everything we need is gonna be found somewhere else, but it's here.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's like accepting what's here. Me accepting that, like looking like this and being able to still share this knowledge is congruent. It's not discongruent because this is who I am. It's authenticity.
Yes.
I think the world that we live in struggles with authenticity because we are given so much rules to exist in.
Oof.
But who imposes those rules? Going back to how we started talking about what is right and what is wrong. You
Mm-hmm.
know, what is wrong of me honoring having piercings because a lot of them are indigenous marks, like my tongue piercing, like that literally, like a lot of the things that I have are, me being coming from indigenous community, being shamanistic, right? Like the tongue piercing is literally just our devotion to like God in a way of pain. So it's called the
Yeah.
warrior piercing.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much things that I could describe about my style, but I don't need to
Yeah.
because as long as I'm just being myself,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not cowering away. I'm not hiding anything about who I am.
Right.
And that I think gives so much more, like, it's so much more valid, I guess, in a way. Like, like I see my clients. I just started at this clinic
Mm-hmm.
about a month ago, and I was at a clinic before that. I'm not gonna mention the name of that place, but whatever. The thing is, I was there for 7 months,
Yeah.
and I had two clients the whole time. I've been
Really?
1 month in this place, and I'm already at 13, growing still. Like
That's
have
it.
consultations every other day.
That's it.
So it's like that's a very different conversation. But to that point, like I have clients from 7 to 64, I believe,
Mm.
and a lot of the times I find myself struggling with imposter syndrome because
Mm-hmm.
I'm so young. I'm like, dang, like, are these people taking me seriously? And I don't know if I like thought that really hard last week that
Mm-hmm.
every single client of mine was like, I just want to say thank you because in the time I've been with you has been very different than any other therapist I've had because
Mm. Love that.
I see that, you actually care about me. And
Yes.
but that's the thing, like, how is it that I, not judging anyone in the field that might take a psychoanalytic stand or a psychodynamic or, very much that path. But I don't see how that's helpful to
Right.
folk. Because
Mm-hmm.
to me, particularly being someone that went through mental health services before I became a mental health provider,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't see that as helpful for myself.
Yeah.
Like me walking in there and just like all my negative stuff being highlighted, like, oh,
Mm.
okay, we have this one goal that we have to fix. The minute you fix that, you out of here.
Mm.
That's not real.
Right.
And to me, that's not therapy
That part.
because I think therapy is holding a space for someone that is unconditionally
Yeah.
accepting,
Yes.
right? Because even as you're saying, I do have my biases and I do have countertransference sometimes that comes up. But as I said, I've had to build a very different set of armor to be able to work from an therapy standpoint. And that one has been one where everything that I've related in this conversation,
Mm-hmm.
seeing them as my friend, seeing them as someone that has gone through shit like I have, seeing them as someone that is as human as I am.
Yeah.
And whenever even there's times that people mention stuff and I'm like, what the fuck? You know what I mean? Like, because being honest, I'm a person too.
Yeah.
But at the same time, when that happens, I remind myself in that moment, I'm like, he's as human as you are.
Mm-hmm.
Or they're as human as, I don't know what I'm saying. They are as human as you are, right?
Yeah.
And it's like, kind of constantly reminding myself that there is no destination to be found other than my own happiness to enjoy and let that spread,
Mm.
right? Then that kind of like gives me peace now,
Yeah.
right? Like that very old Dalai Lama quote where like one candle can light 1,000,
Yep.
right? Like that's really true,
Yes.
and that doesn't mean that I don't still struggle. That doesn't mean that I don't have low periods. It doesn't mean none of that. It just means that I've adapted a director's lens of the story of my life that
Mm-hmm.
is very much founded on the fact that I realize now the power of love and
Mm.
acceptance. Yeah.
Fire. I really want y'all to make sure y'all ears are open. You're listening because, yeah, just everything, yes, that you said. And I think
Mm,
just to the point about like physically, right? Like how we look, how we show up, and, you know, at times experiencing imposter syndrome or questioning, like, just kind of like being I've experienced that as well, where I've been in my head about like maybe how others are perceiving me, right?
mhm,
And I think, I definitely, and I was thinking about a story actually, um, and I'll share it. I'm past it, right? I moved past it, but it was something that happened recently, at the place that I'm working at now. And um, I remember, my when you first get hired or whatever, like you need a
mhm.
photo to put up on the website so that
Yeah. Oh my god.
clients can see you and reach out. They read your bio, they read your description. And in the beginning it was slow, like it was a slow process to me getting clients. Right now I have 25 clients, right?
Mm,
But in the beginning when I first started, it was very slow. It was a slow process. And my supervisor, Shout out to him. He's cool. That's my homie. We moved past it. He is he is he
Me
is
like, why is that? And now I want
right,
to know.
right. And hopefully he don't listen to this podcast, because if he did, he might feel a way about what I'm gonna say. But he is a white male. And and he said to me that, you know, maybe the reason why my clientele is not picking up is because I don't look like a therapist, right? And this was something that I was already and I shared this story just because I feel like it's relevant to what we were talking about, and just like the fact that we already, as people of color, have thoughts about like, how do we look showing up in this space where we are the minority, technically, right, quote unquote, where there
100%.
is you know therapists of color, men and women, in this space. The percentage is low in comparison to
Hmm.
to white people, right? And so him saying that, um I didn't react or respond, but I sat with it, and I realized, and after talking to a couple of my other therapist friends, they were like, "Be what?" They were
Yeah.
mad. They were mad for me, and they
No,
were they
yeah.
were mad, and I was like, you know what? So of course it got addressed. I spoke up about it. Um, eventually, because I didn't want to say anything about it, because I feel like that's his opinion. That's his Honestly, I feel like he was just speaking freely because maybe he felt like we had that relationship for him to speak that way.
Also, white
A-
people think they can say anything they want anytime.
And it is
I'm sorry.
he's operating from a place of privilege, and he
Hmm.
maybe didn't see it in that moment, but once we had a conversation about it, I think he then learned, and through, because I
Yeah.
have a couple of different supervisors there. One of my other supervisors, she spoke to him, and she's a white woman, and she was able to see how that was absolutely not something
Yeah.
that you say.
Yeah.
And so after that, I never removed, because there was another option for me to send another picture, put another picture on the website. I've never removed the picture. I left
Hmm.
the picture where it's at, and I have 25 clients now, and counting, right? And
Work
so I think
and counting.
for me, it's a thing
It's
where,
the accounting
and
part.
counting,
Yeah.
okay, because it's like,
Hmm.
you don't I in that particular instance, I learned, you don't let the opinions of others shake you and move you, because I
Yeah.
could have easily been like, I don't look like a therapist, oh, so let me send another picture that does, because he was suggesting I put on glasses, he was suggesting that I do different
Cosplay.
listen.
Cosplay as a white woman and you'll be good. Trust me.
He was suggesting I do all of these things that,
I
like,
feel you. My old supervisor did the same thing, and
listen.
I said,
And I
"Bye."
was like, excuse me, I want a client to want to have me as their therapist based off of how I show up and look,
Who I am.
who I
Who
am.
I am.
I have
Yeah.
gauges in my ears that a lot of times people don't realize until they're in front of me, because
Like, what?
they're like, "Is that a gauge?" And it's like, "Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I'm a black girl and I got gauges."
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
gauges actually derive from Africa,
No,
and
actually,
people
I
don't
was gonna
know.
say,
A lot of times, people think like, "Oh, like, I've been asked so many times, are you goth? Are you punk? Are you into punk rock?" And it's
no.
like, why would you think that?
That's the thing with my like all the piercings that I have, like
Yeah.
particularly in the middle of your face, they're all indigenous, right? That's why we wear
Hmm.
like the tooth or whatever. And like
Yeah.
whenever I'm like, no, or like I remember now that you mentioned that, yeah, same. That's kind of one of the reasons why I left my own practice
Mm.
because yeah, someone got really adamant about saying comments about why I look like this, but then why did I have so much clients? And I'm like, I have so much clients because I do a better job than you. It doesn't have
Hello.
anything to do with how I look.
Hello.
But I remember that like I guess they were like, yeah, no, they have a valid point in saying that. I'm like, oh, they have a valid point in saying that. Word. I put in
Mm.
my 2 weeks, I think like a week after.
Yeah.
Because that's the thing, as I said, right? Like we would be hypocrites if we don't advocate for ourselves. How am I gonna tell my client, go through this world and advocate for yourself and who you are in your earnest, truthful skin without me doing the same thing for
Yeah.
myself?
Right.
Right. And I think as therapists, I think we're like part of such a new wave of what therapists are
Yeah.
too. I think, past who I've met around the time that I've graduated
Mm-hmm.
are just like us. They have like a very, let's say, different approach to therapy in the way we should be as therapists and in the way we practice it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's something that hasn't been talked about enough because I am tired of holding myself to the like let's say the part of like, oh, you can't share like about your life with your client. How? Like I'm a person. Do you think like that whole blank slate situation,
Yeah.
that whole like thinking you're the professional, as I said, like I just don't think that's therapy anymore. And
Right.
we are in a world that is fully falling down the rims.
Mm,
And the least I can do is provide a loving place for someone,
yeah.
not a place to do the same thing that society is already doing to you that you don't belong. I
Exactly.
want you to feel you belong because I belong. Type stuff,
Exactly.
you know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I second that. And I think, I think that's why our generation, I feel like, is the trailblazers, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
we're in our own right. I feel like we make a difference. And even just what you said with your client saying like, wow, like this is the first time I've had that experience, an experience where I felt like a therapist cared about me, and it's different from the others. I've gotten that same thing too. And I think
Mm-hmm.
what it is that our ideals, our thoughts, the way that we show up is different. We
Mm-hmm.
aren't doing things the traditional route, right? That's why it's like, no, I'm not gonna put on glasses, and I'm not gonna and I'm not gonna have my photo. I'm not gonna have my photo.
Taken down.
Yes, I'm
Changed.
not gonna have my photo
Updated.
taken down. I'm gonna
Yeah.
show up as me and hope that whoever I'm sitting across from can feel that I care about them
Yeah.
truly, right? And we just got the signal from Amir that it's time to wrap up. So,
Yeah.
we're gonna wrap up. But I thank you so much,
No, of course.
Gabe, for sharing all that you did. And I definitely want you to let the audience, listeners, know where they can find you. If you have anything going on that you want people to know about, yeah,
Honestly,
leave your Instagram and
my name, my name got it with the. I mean, my Instagram is like not on the professional side, but still, like I really don't mind it. It's like offline genie.
Mhm.
I am very much me in that page, but I do share a lot of resources there, and I'm kind of working on like more professional, let's say, portfolios. But one thing I would love to actually leave folk with is that,
Yeah.
right? Like, you know, life's hard enough on
Mhm.
you for you to be hard on yourself as well.
Right.
Like, try to find at least 5 minutes a day where you like literally sit with yourself and just be like, what the fuck is going on?
Yeah.
And like, what do I need to keep myself
Hmm.
forward? It's really important to love, but that love, as I said, starts with yourself. Like, if
Hmm.
you don't love yourself, RuPaul really ate that one up. If you don't love you, how the hell are you gonna love anybody else?
Hmm.
That's really true. And I thank you so much for the time though to talk about this. And I'm sorry I was late for it too.
No, it's okay.
But
Go ahead.
it's been a really good conversation.
It has.
And like obviously like this is something that I will have to revisit, or like if anything like it's something that I always look forward to kind of
Mhm.
elaborating on. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Absolutely. And are you taking new clients? Because they gonna
Oh
want
yeah, 100%.
yeah. They gonna want they gonna
Psychology,
come.
psychology today got it like my name. I mean,
Yes,
I probably
it'll
is
be
gonna
in
be
the
there.
bio. I'll make sure to
Yeah,
put it there.
I'll put on my links. I'll send you all my links. But yeah, no, I 100% accept new clients. As I said, like I have a very different modality of therapy, so I think like anyone that wants something different,
Mhm.
that would be it. Because truthfully, I do not operate in any way traditionally.
Yeah.
And I've been recognized for it, like not shunned. So I think it's a good different approach. I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Mm,
Thank you so much, Gabe.
of course.
This was great. Your Mental Matters podcast, guys.
Thank you.
We're
Uh,
out. Dun, dun,
dun,
dun.
dun, dun.
Thank you, Amir, for your patience.